So I wanted to talk today actually about sort of the title that went out was not exactly what I was planning to talk about, but we'll see. I want to talk about the theme of rain and the theme of water. And it comes up a lot over the last few weeks and in the coming weeks. So maybe we start, everyone, if they want, can suggest a few ways that theme comes up. There's some obvious ones. Oh, okay. So Parshas Bereshis itself, we see Parshas Bereshis itself, the creation of the water. Hashem is Merachefes al Pnei Hamayim, al Pnei Hamayim. Thank you. So the creation of the water. What else? Anything else? Oh, we start saying Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem. And Tfilas Geshem during Shmini Atzeres. Also specifically, Sukkot, says in the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, is when the world is judged regarding water. How much water, what's going to be at the right time, too much, etc. Oh, another one, Parshas Noach. That's what I was waiting for. Parshas Noach. Parshas Noach. Okay, were those all the things? Oh, there's one more. Let's see if I can get the other one that I thought of. Okay, I think you can get it. One more. There's one more, yeah. It was on Sukkot. Another Sukkot themed one. It was a certain service in the Beis HaMikdash. What is that?
Hoshana Rabbah.
Hoshana's you said?
Hoshana Rabbah.
Oh, you're saying we daven for rain. If we daven for rain. Very good, very good. Very good. Okay. Yeah, that's related really to this point that we're being judged on Sukkot for wars. The Geshem. Yeah, very good, very good. So the other thing I was thinking of is Nisach HaMayim. There's a service we do in the Beis HaMikdash that the water was poured next to a certain place on the Mizbeach. And this was an avodah that was only occurring during Sukkot. This was not something that we had in, as far as I know, any other time of year, which is very interesting. Okay, so this time of year, in my mind, the theme is rain, the theme is water, the theme is, what's going to be with the crops in, the next few months. That's the theme of the year, of this time of year. Sukkot screams that Parshas Bereshis, and of course Parshas Noach, I love Parshas Noach. It's my wife's favorite parsha, for sure. I think it's my kid's favorite parsha, probably too. We like Parshas Noach a lot. So in Parshas Noach, Hashem destroys the world with a mabul. So we're going to talk a little bit about this contradiction we see by water. Let's go back to the basics. So what are some of the things that we know about water? What are some? When you think of water, what do you think of? Life. Water is a life-sustaining force. Both the human, or 70% water, they say, right? 75% water, something like that. We need to drink water, if not, we'll be thirsty, be dehydrated. And also on a global level, if not for water, plant life won't develop, rivers would dry up, everything like that. Okay, maybe think a little more on a spiritual level. Any other ideas? What else do you think when you think of water? Sorry, Mike, say it again? Oh, very good. Ein mayim ella taira. Water is compared to taira. Sorry, taira is compared to water, I should say. Very good. That's another one. Anything else?
The heavens are shamayim.
Oh, Hashem made a separation between what was upper waters, lower waters. That was part of Parshas Bereshis too. Anything else? Also on a spiritual level? Anything else?
So Mayim comes up in so many ways all through the Tanakh. I don't know which one is most prominent, but all through Sefer Bereshit, all through the Chumash, there are wells.
Oh, very good.
All over the place.
Very nice. Wells. We're gonna talk about the wells. So don't worry, we're gonna talk about it. The very interesting thing that comes up in the Maharal. I'm gonna get to it. I'm too excited about it, so to be patient.
also the Nile River,
Nile River.
Yarden, all very important parts of our story.
Right. There you go.
Or matriarchs and their husbands met wells. I mean, appears.
Jules, you preempted me. I was gonna get to that. We're gonna talk all about that. Okay, good. You're giving an introduction to something we're gonna talk about. Very good. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to note. Is that happened at least by Yitzchak, Yaakov, and also Moshe Rabbeinu, that they met their wives by the well. We have to see why that is. Another thing in Ruchnius, a mikvah. The mikvah is one of the most important mitzvahs we have. It allows the Jewish people to have families and marriage. The mikvah, it's a source of purity, cleanliness. Also, water is a source of cleanliness. We wash our hands in the water. We bathe in the water. We clean our clothing in the water. We wash our dishes. Water is a part of a cleansing agent. Okay. On the other hand, though, there are also some negative things about it. What are some negative things, whether in Ruchnius or Gashmius, that we have about water? Even the most basic things. You drown the water. You drink the water, right? Too much water is not a good thing. You drown in water. You can't breathe underwater, too. So we can't breathe, no oxygen.
I was going to say, if you wanted Pharaoh's soldiers, you wouldn't like water that much.
Oh, very good. Right, that's true. That's true. If you want Pharaoh's soldiers, you wouldn't like water. Like we said before, Parshas Noach, Hashem destroyed the world with water. He didn't destroy it with fire. He didn't destroy it with, a lightning bolt. He didn't destroy it by snapping his fingers. He destroyed it with water, of all things. Why? Anything else? Very heavy rain can destroy crops. We know in Sukkot that a heavy rain exempts a person from Sukkot, right? And even if it could be, if it happens on Yom Tif, it's called a siman klala. The Gemara gives a metaphor that it's like a person came to serve Hashem, sitting in the sukkah, do a mitzvah, and it's like the master just pour the water back on the eved. Pour it back on the eved. It's a big sign of a klala. So water can be both a sign of bracha and a sign of klala. We have to talk about why that is. Water, on the one hand, is associated with life, but in a way, it's also associated with death. Water is an inhospitable place for a human being. Why is that? What's going on? So let's get back a little bit to Moshe Rabbeinu. So just the basic life story of Moshe Rabbeinu, at least the early years. Moshe Rabbeinu was born at a time of a terrible decree. Pharaoh decreed on the Jewish people that all the male children that are born to Jewish women would be thrown into the Nile. Now Moshe was born, and it says that he was like this incredible child, incredible baby, like the whole house shone. He was born mahul, he was born already with a bris milah. Incredible, incredible things. And his parents, Yocheved, she tried to hide him so that he wouldn't be subject to the decree. Ultimately, they put him in this sort of basket, and he floated down the Nile River. And it says that Bas Paro, her name was Basia, was one who says, the Medrash says that she stretched out her hand and was able to reach out to him and get him. And ultimately, she ended up raising Moshe Rabbeinu as her child. Now, let's analyze the name Moshe. Chazal tell us Moshe, it actually means drawn from water, because Basia gave him that name. It's interesting to note that it was actually Basia Basparo, an Egyptian person, that gave Moshe Rabbeinu his name. We actually call him. So this name alludes to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was drawn from the water. Moshe Rabbeinu was drawn from the water. So what is that teaching us? So the Maharal teaches in Gevuras Hashem, where the Maharal darshans much of the beginning of Sefer Shmos, Book of Exodus. The Maharal says, whereas Moshe Rabbeinu, represents the ultimate in spirituality. He was the greatest tzaddik that ever lived, the only prophet that was able to, Kabiyachol, speak face to face with Hashem, Kabiyachol. He was the pinnacle of spirituality. Water, on the other hand, says the Maharal, and this is a very interesting point, is the pinnacle of Gashmis, physicality. Why is that? So in the Maharal's terminology, spirituality is called form, tsura, right? It's form. It is a specific shape. It is that. That's what spirituality is. Whereas water is all over the place. It takes any form. It takes up any form. It doesn't have a form. When you put water in a cup, it takes on the form of that cup. But if you put it on a table, it just goes everywhere. It has no form. So something that is formless is the opposite of spiritual. The opposite. We think of spirituality, this person is Dvekus and he's, swaying in the wind and he's totally out of this world. And there's something to that. But spirituality is not a free-for-all. It's not a Hefgerwelt, as they say. Spirituality is discipline. There's something within spirituality. Spirituality requires discipline. And that's what form is. Form is a discipline. Now, if water is the complete representation of Gashmias, of materialism, then why do we find, for instance, that Moshe meets his wife Tzipora by the well? What does that have to do with anything? So, one of the major rules in spirituality is everything's always relative. There's spirituality on one level, it could be the physicality on a higher level, right? And vice versa. So we have physicality on one level, it could be the spirituality level lower. So in that dichotomy is often referred to as Zachar and Nekeva, male and female, male being the spiritual side, the female being the physical side, not because males and females are more spiritual or physical, that's not to do with, just there's an idea of giver and receiver. These are ideas in Jewish thought and spirituality. So Nekeva, a woman, is associated with water because the Nekeva comes from the side more of materialism. Not because, like I'm saying, not because women are more materialist, that's not the idea, but because a woman is a receiver. In the essential sense, not that every woman is this or that. That's not what we're saying. Just if you go up to the top, that's the conceptually speaking, how you delineate. So the well, water, which represents in a sense the feminine, is a very perfect place for a shidduch to happen. That's why. Moshe Rabbeinu represents the spiritual side of things. The well, the water, represents the physical. And that's a very good place for a shidduch. Okay? That's what the Maharal says. I think it's a very beautiful idea. And that's also why Yitzchak Avinu met his wife there. Sorry, I should rephrase. That Eliezer, Eved Avram, found Rivka there. That's what I should rephrase. And also, Yaakov Avinu, as we know, famously meets Rachel. Sees Rachel at first by the well. Okay, so two aspects of water. Water, in a sense, represents physicality. But we said before also that water, we say ein mayim ela Torah. Water is the mashal we use, the metaphor for the greatest thing in spirituality imaginable, the Torah. So, again, I'm gonna go on a tangent a little bit, and I think it'll help us understand this issue. So, does anyone know what was the first machlokes in history? Doesn't have to be between people. That will be a hint. What was the first machlokes, the first conflict in history?
In the Malachim and Hashem.
Cain and Hevel, okay, interesting, yeah. Malachim. You want to say the Malachim and Hashem, what, when they created man? Yes. Interesting, that is definitely an early one. Yeah. So, I saw a very, very interesting idea. The first machlokes in history was actually that, right, on the second day, Hashem made this firmament between two waters. There was the upper waters and the lower waters. And the lower waters, Haviyachol, whatever this means, were actually jealous of the higher waters. Why do you guys get to be so close to Hashem? I'm all the way down here. What's going on? Why is that? So we see water is actually the subject, the participants of the first ever machlekes. As far as I know, there was no machlekes before this. I saw this, the name of a certain rabbi. This was the first machlekes. So what is that about water, that water should be the subject of the first machlekes? Water can come in two ways. We can have a giant body of water. You have the Pacific Ocean. It's so vast, it's like almost unimaginable. And it's one body. It's one thing. And all the water comes together to create that body. On the other hand, you could have individual drops of water that are totally separate. So water, when it's separate, represents what's called pirud, separation. Right? Drops of water all separate from each other. They have the power to come together and combine and become something much greater, but they could also be totally separate. So there's two types of water. There's this upper water and this lower water. So the way I want to explain this is, and why we see sometimes water can be used as a source of spirituality, and other times is just a complete representation of materialism. In my Melatira, the water is used in purification. It represents incredible levels of spirituality. And yet, Hashem used the water to destroy mankind. And water is a complete inhospitable place for humans. So, as they say in learning, sveidinim. There's two ideas over here. There's a determining factor. Depending on this determining factor, will determine whether water is a source of bracha or the opposite, God forbid. And I think it requires this introduction. So when we do avodas Hashem, there's two things in avodas Hashem. There's the divine light, and there's the receptacle to receive that divine light. Water actually represents both those things. Water can be the divine light. The water is the Torah. Right? Water is representation of Torah. Water is the source of all the bounty in the world. If we don't have water, we don't have all that vegetation. We don't have what to drink. Water is bounty. That's why we daven Mashiv Ruach Umrei Geshem. Water is the bounty that gives us life. At the same time, water is also the kli, the receptacle to receive bounty, right? Because where does all water go ultimately? All water ultimately ends up in the oceans, in larger bodies of water. Ultimately, the comes down, either goes onto land, the mountains, somewhere else, and flows rivers into the great oceans. Okay, then the process repeats itself, evaporation, everything. But water represents that receptacle. So water has two aspects to it. It's the divine bounty, but it's also the receptacle. And that way, spirituality is that light, and physicality, when we do mitzvahs using the physical world, that creates the vessels to receive the spirituality. So water represents both those things. It is the divine light, but it's also the receptacle for the divine light. And that's really what physicality is. Physicality is a means by which we can experience divine light. Otherwise, we have no access to it. It's only by coming into this world that's so lowly, so physical, that we have the opportunity to do mitzvahs. That's why the world, we say olam, I'm sure everyone's heard this before, olam, world, is from the same root as the word ha'elan, hidden. Because if not for physicality, divine light would be so apparent in our life, it would actually destroy it. We actually wouldn't be able to handle it. So the physical world is actually the means by which we create vessels to receive the divine light. Otherwise, we'd have no way to receive it. So the Torah, which is the ultimate of divine light. When we learn Torah, that's the ultimate way to connect to divine light. There's a story, it's a very interesting story. I'll say this by the way. There's a story of I want to say it was, I'm not going to quote who it was, but it was a certain Hasidic Rabbi. And his Hasidim knew that he would go into, after Shalshudis, he would have a little time to himself. He would go into his study. He'd be alone by himself. And they saw this incredible light coming from underneath the door. This was the start. He saw this incredible light coming from underneath the door. And they all were so curious what was going on there. So of course, one of the Chassidim one day gets to decide, I have to figure it out. I'm just too curious. I can't stand not knowing. I have to. So he went into the room before Shalosh Shudas and he hid there, waited for the Rebbe to come in. And once the Rebbe was there, came in after the Shalosh Shudas. And now the Rebbe's there. So you imagine, okay, wow, the Rebbe's probably, communing with Eliyahu Hanavi. It's probably something incredible. And all he sees the Rebbe take a volume of Rambam, Maimonides, the book of Maimonides' Code of Halacha, Yad Chazaka, off the shelf and open it up. And all he saw. And he couldn't believe it. He was like, wow, that's where all this light came from. So you see, Torah is this incredible source of light. That's just a very, very practical example of it. So water, we said, is the first Laphalakis was really, the water was the subject of. Because water has this aspect of unification, but also this aspect of period. Water has an aspect of giving, it also has the aspect of receiving. For us, in our own lives, one of the manifestations of machlekes is when our ruchnius, our spirituality, is not in line with our physicality, when our materialism is not coexisting with our spirituality. And now that could take on a lot of forms. Sometimes that's a person who has no connection to Judaism at all, right? So his soul is yearning for something and is just not living that way at all. I think for most people who are engaged in Torah or engaged in mitzvahs, at least on some level, there's a different dissonance that goes on, which is they learn Torah, and they learn lofty ideas in Torah, Shal Shuvas, or at Shul, they hear a drasha, a beautiful drasha. And there's an internal life like this, because they say, I'm not really living like that necessarily. That's not the focus of my everyday or my every moment. And there's that dissonance. I want spirituality, I hold it's an ideal, but it doesn't actually make a ration, doesn't actually make a, help me with my English over here, doesn't actually come down and have an effect on my day-to-day life. Impact. Doesn't have an impact, thank you. So part of the lesson of water, right, there's a disconnect between the upper waters and lower waters. They're not together, right? There's the spiritual waters and the physical waters, for lack of a better term. And this represents our own avodas Hashem. This represents our own connection to Torah and to Hashem. When our physical lives aren't in line with our spiritual lives, when we're one type of person in shul or in the kollel and the beis medrash, one person with a sefer, but then we're another person when we're dealing with our wife or at our jobs or dealing with the car mechanic or sitting in traffic, and those two people are not the same person, we're in a conflict with ourselves. Torah is meant to be translated to our everyday life. Torah is meant for the beis medrash, but it's also meant for the home. In America, I think it's a separation of church and state. Separation. Everything is it's totally two different worlds. Okay, I'm one person in the house of worship, and I'm another person in the political house. The two aren't supposed to meet. But in Judaism, it couldn't be further from the truth. The Beis HaMikdash in Judaism isn't necessarily the shul. It's the home. Or it's whatever way a person interacts and comes down into this world to try to live a spiritual life. So we need both, but we need it to speak to each other. We need the Torah that we learn and the spirituality that we imbue to inform how we live on a day-to-day life. Now, that's very hard. That's very hard. Very hard to do that. How do we, you learn lofty things, you learn you come to a shir, you learn all about Geshem and rain and everything, and now you're supposed to, okay, how does this work? What am I supposed to do? So the tzaddikim taught us a very special thing. The tzaddikim taught us an amazing thing. There's such a concept of turning your entire learning into tefillah. You learn something, a lofty idea, right? I'll give an example. The Ramban, he wrote a letter to his son, talking all about Musar, how a person is supposed to be humble, a person is supposed to speak softly, how a person is supposed to feel a certain sense of shiftless, of lowliness. It's a beautiful, beautiful letter. Everyone should try to read it if they haven't before. So a person can take that letter of the Ramban and turn the entire letter into a tefillah. And even though he may not necessarily be ready to live with that level of humility that the Ramban is telling us about, but the means to do it is in tefillah. When a person davens, he's expressing, he says, I have a ratzon, I have a desire to live a certain way. He may not be there yet, but the tefillah actualizes the ratzon to a certain extent and brings him closer to living that way. So the practical lesson I want to bring out, what's supposed to mediate between these upper waters, these lower waters that I said in our own lives represent this period, the separation that we have between our ruchnius lives, our spiritual lives, and our physical lives, where we may feel it easy to be spiritual in shul or behind the sefer, but not when we're dealing with cranky children or with a boss who has no patience. We don't feel it in those situations. So what are we supposed to do? So the answer is, the mediating factor over here is tefillah. To turn the Torah that you learn into a tefillah. You say, Hashem, I want to be able to live my life with patience and compassion for the people I'm around, etc. And a person can do that any time of day. So what do we have over here? Just to get a quick summary. Water, we have two aspects of water. We have water is life-giving, but water is also has the potential to destroy life. Water represents spirituality, but it also represents physicality. Ein mayim ela Torah, but like we said, Geshem, rain, is the same shirish, the same root as Gashmias, the same root. So water has both these things. So I tried to explain that water has two aspects. It's the bounty, but it's also the receptacle for that bounty. And as such, water represents both spirituality and physicality. We said water was the source, the subject of the first machlokes, the lower waters and the upper waters, and had this separation from the upper waters. And our goal, and that represents in our own lives the separation we have between our spiritual selves and our physical selves. We may be spiritual people. And have very lofty ideas, but then bring it down into our day-to-day life and live with that in both scenarios. That's very hard for us. So I said to try to merge those two. What's the answer? I think, and this is based on the writing of the tzaddikim, that the merging factor is tefillah. When you take a lofty concept in Torah and daven for it, that's bringing the two closer together. So I think that is one of the lessons that we see from mayim, from water. Hopefully we can use that over the next few weeks as we look forward to Hanukkah. About less than 2 months, actually. So yeah, that's what we have. We have Cheshvan is coming. Cheshvan is not so much going on. Mar Cheshvan happens to be at the yahrzeit of Rachli Menu in a couple of weeks. That's a big deal. But there's a lot of opportunity to daven for all the things that we may have davened for over Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and sort of lost steam for over the last few weeks. Now we can get back into it. We can learn Torah and daven for those lofty things that we find in Torah, the connection to Hashem, perfection of our midot, success in our relationships, and everything like that. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.